Have you ever stopped to reflect on how Jesus' wisdom can completely change the course of your life? We are not just talking about learning more things or developing intelligence, but about a heavenly wisdom that comes directly from God and surpasses the limits of human understanding. A wisdom that guides amidst uncertainties, illuminates difficult choices, and sustains us in times of crisis. From the hills of Galilee to the roads of Jerusalem, Jesus' words have crossed centuries, transforming hearts and shaping generations. His teachings remain alive, relevant, and powerful even today. In this video, we will dive into some of the deepest lessons of Jesus about true wisdom, and by the end, you will discover an essential principle for living this wisdom in a practical way. 1. Wisdom that comes from God goes beyond human logic. Often we do everything right, and yet the results don't turn out as we expected. It's like following a recipe to the letter, and the cake still doesn't rise. The world teaches us that knowledge is power, but reality shows that human knowledge is limited. It cannot protect us from all the pains, losses, and uncertainties of life. Divine wisdom, on the other hand, functions like a spiritual compass. Even when we cannot see the final destination, it points us in the right direction. Imagine walking through a desert full of mirages, promises that seem real but vanish as you approach. That is the wisdom of the world, unstable, fleeting, and often disappointing. God's wisdom, however, remains steadfast. It does not depend on circumstances or on what the eyes can see. Jesus invites us to seek this wisdom from above, the one that guides us even when everything seems confusing. Trusting God means accepting that He sees what we cannot. This is not naive faith but deep trust. Sometimes divine wisdom leads us to make decisions that seem strange to the world's eyes, but carry a greater purpose. It is like building a house on rock instead of sand. It requires effort, but it ensures stability when storms arrive. True wisdom is not in the amount of information we accumulate, but in the ability to see life from God's perspective. It teaches us to act with discernment, not on impulse. The difference between reacting emotionally and living with purpose lies exactly there. 2. The greatness hidden in humility. The world conditions us to seek high positions, recognition, status, and power. From an early age, we are taught that success is being above others, but how often do these achievements bring emptiness instead of peace? Jesus presented a completely different logic. He taught that the truly great is the one who humbles himself. For God, humility is not weakness, it is spiritual strength. Think of a strong, tall tree. The higher it grows, the deeper its roots must go. Likewise, the more we walk in humility, the stronger we become spiritually. Humbling ourselves does not mean abandoning dreams, but understanding that our value does not come from accomplishments, but from our identity in God. When we understand this, we are freed from the need to prove something to others. Jesus demonstrated this truth by washing his disciples' feet. The greatest became the servant. The true leader serves with love. Perhaps you are seeking recognition when true greatness is in silent gestures, in helping without an audience, loving without applause, and serving without expecting anything in return. This is the wisdom that transforms the heart. 3. Discernment that protects from life's traps. Not every trap appears dangerous. Many come disguised as good opportunities, promising relationships or attractive shortcuts. The problem is that our emotions can deceive us. Jesus warned that there are wolves in sheep's clothing. That is, not everything that seems good comes from God. Spiritual discernment is like a lighthouse in the fog. Without it, we can get lost, even when we think we are on the right path. It allows us to see beyond appearances. This discernment does not come from experience alone, but from communion with God, through prayer, His Word, and a heart sensitive to the guidance of the Holy Spirit. The closer we get to God, the clearer His voice becomes. What once seemed confusing begins to make sense. If something inside you causes unease, it may be God alerting you. Divine wisdom teaches us to wait, reflect, and choose with spiritual maturity. 4. When faith triumphs over logic, human logic often leads us to give up. God shows all the reasons why something will not work, but faith invites us to take steps even without understanding everything. Jesus taught something that directly confronts human logic: to love our enemies. To the world, this sounds like weakness. Culture teaches us to retaliate, protect our pride, win arguments, and never show vulnerability. But in God's kingdom, the way is different. Love is not passivity. It is spiritual power. It is the weapon that dismantles hatred, breaks cycles of revenge, and opens space for the transformation that only God can operate. When Jesus said to pray for those who persecute us, he was not proposing an impossible ideal. He was revealing a higher spiritual reality, where good triumphs over evil not by force but by grace. Loving when we are hurt requires faith because it goes against our instincts. But it is precisely at this point that heaven moves. The entire Bible testifies that God acts beyond human logic. At the Red Sea, the people of Israel were trapped. In front of them, an impossible sea to cross. Behind them, the most powerful army of the time coming to destroy them. Reason said it was the end. There was no escape route, no plan B, no visible hope. But God did not need a road. He created one. When Moses obeyed and stretched out the staff, the waters parted. What was an obstacle became a path. Where there was only death, liberation appeared. Faith did not just change the situation, it revealed the power of a God who rules over nature, enemies, and the impossible. The same principle is seen in the story of Lazarus. When Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. To the human mind, all hope was gone. Martha and Mary believed in Jesus' power, but limited it to the right time. If the Lord had been here, my brother would not have died, they said. In other words, it's too late now. But in God's kingdom, it is never too late. Jesus did not rush to prevent death. He waited to reveal something greater, that he is Lord over life and death. When Lazarus fell ill, the news reached Jesus, and many might have expected him to act immediately to save his friend from an inevitable fate. But Jesus had a purpose beyond temporary healing. He wanted to demonstrate unequivocally God's power over all things, including death. Human time is limited and often makes us desperate. When someone we love suffers, our tendency is to act immediately, seek answers, and find quick solutions. But divine wisdom shows us that there are times when waiting is necessary, and God's apparent delay is not neglect but a perfect plan unfolding. Jesus did not ignore the pain. He felt it deeply, sharing in the sorrow of Martha, Mary, and everyone around. He wept with them, showing that compassion and empathy are part of God's power, which is neither distant nor indifferent to human suffering. When Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. The tomb was sealed, the body decomposing, the air heavy with stench, a scene of despair. To any observer, it seemed like the final end, a situation without hope. But Jesus did not limit himself to observing the impossible. He knew death had no authority over him, nor over those who belonged to the Father. His word contained life, and his presence carried the promise of resurrection. Lazarus, come out, Jesus declared with absolute authority, and life returned. The dead man came out of the tomb wrapped in burial cloths, but breathing again, proving that nothing is impossible for God. This miracle was not just about restoring a man's physical life. It was a clear demonstration that Jesus is Lord of all, the way to eternal life, and that even in the darkest moments, he remains in control. This story teaches us that faith does not ignore reality. It sees beyond it. To Martha and Mary, Lazarus's death seemed like an unsolvable end. To Jesus, it was an opportunity to reveal God's glory. Often in our own lives, we face tombs that seem sealed, broken relationships, interrupted dreams, lost hopes. Human logic tells us there is no way out, that everything is over. But Jesus calls us to trust, even when we cannot understand the reasons behind our circumstances. God's power is not limited by time, physical conditions, or human logic. He operates beyond the limitations we impose. When we learn to wait on him, we understand that every apparent delay can be the perfect setting for his glory to manifest fully and undeniably. God's patience is never passive. It is always strategic and purposeful. Every detail, every moment of waiting, every tear shed has meaning within his divine plan. Moreover, the miracle of Lazarus reminds us that God also works in the spiritual aspect of our lives. Often what is dead in our hearts, hope, faith, courage, or dreams, needs divine intervention to be reborn. Just as Lazarus came out of the tomb at Jesus' command, our lives can be restored when we place ourselves under the Lord's care and guidance. Resurrection is a symbol of God's power to turn endings into new beginnings, pain into blessing, loss into victory. Another essential point of this story is that Jesus deeply cared for those around the tomb. He did not just raise Lazarus, he comforted broken hearts, gave hope to the desperate, and showed that compassion walks hand in hand with divine power. God does not only restore the impossible, he also tends to us emotionally and spiritually as we go through trials. The miracle of Lazarus challenges us to trust God in every circumstance. Often, we want to control outcomes, rush answers, or create our own solutions. But Jesus shows us that true faith is waiting and believing even when nothing indicates a way out. When we allow God to work at the right time, we discover that He can perform miracles greater than we could imagine. Therefore, when you encounter situations that seem hopeless, remember Lazarus. Remember that Jesus did not rush to prevent death. He waited to reveal His glory. Remember that even the most sealed tombs can open at the voice of Christ. And remember that faith is not the absence of difficulty, but trust in the God who rules over life and death, the Creator who turns the impossible into reality. May we learn from this story not to despair in the face of loss, to trust fully in God's wisdom, and to allow Him to act in our lives at the right time. May we hear the voice of Jesus even when everything seems lost, and respond with faith, courage, and hope. And may every impossible situation we face become, in God's hands, the stage for a miracle that glorifies His name and transforms our lives forever. What seemed like the end was only the perfect setting for a greater miracle. This teaches us something profound. God often allows us to reach points where human logic is exhausted, precisely so that His glory can manifest without doubt. If there had been a bridge across the Red Sea, no one would have called it a miracle. If Lazarus had only been sick, the resurrection would not have had the same impact. But when all seems lost, God shows who He is. True faith does not deny reality. Faith recognizes pain, fear, loss, and difficulty, but chooses to trust a God who rules over all of it. Faith does not say the problem doesn't exist. It says the problem is not greater than God. That is why Jesus calls us to live differently, to love enemies when we have been hurt, to trust when there is no visible way out, to wait when everything seems over. This is not naivety, it is spiritual maturity. Because those who trust God understand that heaven moves in dimensions human eyes cannot reach. Often, we want quick solutions, clear explanations, and immediate answers. But God works in processes. He uses silence, waiting, and even pain to shape our faith. The miracle is not only what He does outwardly, it is what He builds inside us as we wait. The Red Sea did not merely free Israel from Egypt. It taught the people to depend on God. The resurrection of Lazarus did not merely bring life back. It revealed who Jesus truly was. Similarly, the battles we face today are not just obstacles. They are opportunities to know God on a deeper level. When you love those who have hurt you, you resemble Christ. Loving those who have wronged us is undoubtedly one of the most challenging acts a human can perform. The world teaches us to react with anger, revenge, or resentment, to seek immediate justice by our own means. But Christ showed us a different path, a path of love, forgiveness, and compassion. This love does not ignore pain or justify injustice. It chooses to release the heart from bitterness so life can flow without the weight of grudges. When you choose to love those who hurt you, you walk the path of true freedom, demonstrating strength that comes from faith, not reason. Loving your enemy is above all an act of courage. It requires looking beyond the visible, seeing the human heart, and understanding that we are all flawed and in need of God's grace. It is at this point that divine love manifests in us. It transforms our pain into compassion, our anger into patience, and our hurt into mercy. When we learn to love as Christ loves, even in the face of injustice, we become living instruments of His presence in the world. This love not only impacts those who hurt us, but also transforms the one who practices it, shaping character, strengthening faith, and uplifting the spirit. When you trust without understanding, you walk by faith. True faith does not depend on logical explanations, immediate results, or visible paths. It is the absolute confidence that God is in control, even when circumstances seem to contradict any possibility of victory. Trusting without understanding means surrendering our plans, expectations, and anxieties into the hands of the Creator, believing that He sees beyond what we can. It is believing that every challenge, obstacle, and pain has a greater purpose that will be revealed at the right time. Life often presents situations that seem impossible to understand: losses, disappointments, injustices, and deep emotional wounds. In these moments, faith sustains us, guides us, and gives us courage to move forward even when we cannot see the end of the tunnel. It is walking through dark paths, trusting that God's light is ahead of us, illuminating every step. Trust without understanding allows miracles to happen, doors to open, and the impossible to become reality. It is a silent testimony of God's power operating through our lives. When you remain steadfast, even without answers, you grow spiritually. Standing firm in the face of uncertainty is an exercise of inner strength that reveals the depth of our faith. Often we desire clear signs, quick answers, or immediate results. But God operates on a larger plan that we cannot always perceive right away. Perseverance teaches patience, humility, and resilience. Every challenge faced without giving up strengthens the spirit, builds character, and draws us closer to Christ. Spiritual maturity is not instantaneous. It is built through the constant practice of trusting, forgiving, and loving. Every time we choose to respond with faith instead of fear, with love instead of hatred, or with hope instead of despair, we move closer to Christ-likeness. This process, though often painful, produces eternal fruits: inner peace, spiritual clarity, and a heart capable of reflecting God's love in all circumstances. When you love, trust, and stand firm, you become a reflection of Christ's character. He is the perfect example of someone who loved without measure, trusted without understanding, and remained steadfast in the face of adversity. His life teaches us that true love, genuine faith, and perseverance do not depend on what we see, feel, or comprehend. They depend on complete surrender to God's plan and absolute confidence in His wisdom and goodness. Practicing this love, faith, and steadfastness transforms not only our lives but also the lives of those around us. Love heals wounds, reconciles relationships, and builds bridges where walls once stood. Faith brings courage and hope, even in the darkest moments. Spiritual steadfastness gives us stability and security, allowing us to move forward without being shaken by chaos or pain. Each of these elements, when cultivated, strengthens the spirit and prepares us to experience the blessings God has reserved. Therefore, every challenge we face, every wound we receive, and every situation we do not understand is an opportunity for growth. When we choose to love those who hurt us, trust without understanding, and stand firm even without answers, we become instruments of God's grace, living in a way that glorifies His name. It is a call to walk by faith, not by fear, to act with love, not by logic, to remain steadfast, not by human security, but by divine trust. This constant practice of love, faith, and steadfastness brings us closer to a full spiritual life. It teaches us that even when everything seems lost or impossible, God is present, working in our lives to bring transformation, restoration, and victory. It shows us that true strength is not in controlling the world around us, but in allowing God to work through us. In summary, when you love those who have hurt you, trust without understanding, and remain steadfast even without answers, you not only face life differently, you become a reflection of Christ in the world. You live an active faith, a love that heals, and a courage that inspires. You demonstrate that spiritual life is not about the absence of pain, but about the presence of God. May every choice to love, trust, and remain steadfast be a step towards spiritual maturity, inner peace, and the manifestation of God's glory in your life. Choose every day to love without limits, trust without hesitation, and stand firm even when there are no answers. It is on this path that true transformation happens. It is on this path that the impossible becomes possible, pain becomes learning, and life becomes a living expression of God's power and love. And it is in this place that the greatest miracles occur. God continues to part seas. God continues to resurrect dreams. God continues to transform endings into new beginnings. The logic of the world says, it's over. Faith says, God is not done yet. And when we learn to live by faith, we discover a powerful truth. The impossible is merely the stage where God chooses to manifest His glory. Trust, persevere, love beyond reason. Because the same God who parted the sea and conquered death continues to govern every detail of your story. Perhaps today you face a difficult decision. Logic says to give up, but God is calling you to move forward in faith. 5. The spiritual power of silence. We live surrounded by noise, opinions, and hurry. There is always something demanding our attention, but Jesus taught us that silence is a place of encounter with God. He often withdrew to pray in solitary places. In silence, God's voice becomes clearer. Many wrong decisions happen because we do not stop to listen before acting. Silence is not the absence of action, it is trust. There are moments when staying quiet is the wisest choice. The Bible reminds us clearly, even a fool is considered wise when he keeps silent. Proverbs 17:28. How often are we driven by haste, emotion, or the desire to defend ourselves, and end up speaking more than we should, bringing unnecessary consequences? Silence, though often underestimated, is a powerful tool of wisdom, a refuge that protects us from impulsiveness and puts us in harmony with God. Jesus Christ is the greatest example of this practice. During his earthly ministry, he faced unjust accusations, provocation, and slander. At crucial moments, such as before the Sanhedrin or even in front of Pilate, Jesus remained silent. Matthew 26:63. This silence was not a sign of weakness or indifference, but a demonstration of full trust in God's plan. He knew that not every battle needs to be fought with human words. Sometimes silent action, patient waiting, and submission to the divine will reveal more power than any immediate defense could. Silence has the power to teach us profound lessons. It invites patience, contemplation, and careful listening to the Holy Spirit. It is in silence that the heart learns to rest, the mind finds clarity, and the soul grows strong. Many answers that seemed unreachable amidst life's noise and hurry arise when we allow ourselves simply to be still, attentive to God's voice, which speaks subtly yet profoundly. It is in this space of calm and humility that wisdom grows and solidifies. Furthermore, silence connects us with a deeper spiritual sensitivity. When we speak constantly, we often lose subtle perceptions of the Spirit. Silence allows us to discern signs, understand situations, and perceive divine direction. It creates an inner environment conducive to listening and reflecting, meditating on our actions, and better understanding the purpose of our experiences. Those who learn to value silence discover it as a tool of spiritual maturity, teaching us to act prudently and respond to situations with discernment. Another important dimension of silence is its ability to protect us from the traps of the tongue. Proverbs 21:23 says, "Whoever guards his mouth and tongue keeps his soul from trouble." Often, careless words hurt, destroy relationships, and create unnecessary conflicts. Silence, when used wisely, prevents misunderstandings, preserves relationships, and keeps us at peace even in the face of provocation. It is a practice of self-control and mastery, virtues highly valued in the Bible. Silence also prepares us to face struggles and persecutions with courage and faith. Not all battles are visible or understood by others. Some challenges require that we remain steadfast, without reacting impulsively, trusting that God is in control. Just as Jesus faced false testimony and injustice without defending himself, we are also called to maintain serenity in adversity, knowing that God's justice is perfect and that he acts in his perfect timing. This type of wisdom strengthens faith because it teaches us to rely not on our own strength but on divine providence. Moreover, silence is a form of prayer and surrender. When we quiet ourselves before God, we make space for him to work within us, shaping our character and guiding us. In times of difficulty, we do not need all the answers immediately. We can simply be still, trust, and allow God's presence to lead us, providing peace that surpasses all understanding. Philippians 4:7. This daily practice of spiritual stillness makes us more sensitive to God's movement, better prepared to obey, and more capable of discerning his will in all areas of life. Silence also teaches humility. By remaining quiet, we acknowledge that we do not have all the answers and that we depend on God's wisdom. It reminds us that our perspective is limited, but God sees the full picture, knows our challenges, and knows exactly how to act on our behalf. This attitude of humility strengthens our relationship with the Creator and protects us from pride and self-sufficiency, which often distance us from true wisdom. Another important point is that silence generates reflection. In moments of stillness, we are invited to examine our thoughts, attitudes, and emotions. It is an invitation to introspection, sincere evaluation of our choices, and inner transformation. Without this pause for reflection, we risk reacting mechanically, based on fleeting emotions, without considering the impact of our words and actions. Silence creates the necessary space for the mind and spirit to align with God's principles, strengthening our character and preparing us to act with justice and love. Finally, silence is not the absence of action. On the contrary, it is a conscious act of control, patience, and trust. It allows us to observe, learn, discern, and decide with clarity. It teaches us that not every battle needs to be fought immediately. Not every injustice demands instant defense, and that often waiting and trusting in silence is more powerful than any hasty reaction. Silence teaches us that true strength lies in fully trusting God, allowing Him to guide our steps, and recognizing that He works for our good, even when we do not see immediate results. In conclusion, silence is a spiritual virtue that draws us closer to God, strengthens our discernment, and prepares us to face challenges with wisdom and serenity. It teaches us patience, protects us from the snares of the tongue, makes us sensitive to the Spirit's work, and connects us with true wisdom. Just as Jesus remained silent in the face of unjust accusations, we are called to cultivate moments of stillness, trust in God's plan, and allow Him to work profoundly and transformatively in our lives. Silence is, therefore, not merely a pause, but an instrument of spiritual growth, a path to maturity, and a testimony of true faith. Jesus made it clear that we would face difficulties, but He also taught us that trials strengthen us. Just as a tree develops deeper roots during storms, our faith deepens through challenges. God uses difficult moments to shape our character, strengthen our trust, and purify our hearts. The disciples rejoiced even when they were persecuted, because they knew they were living in God's will. Divine wisdom empowers us to respond with love, grace, and hope, even in the midst of pain. And most importantly, we never face struggles alone. Jesus overcame the world, and in Him we are more than conquerors. It gives us the ability to see beyond the present, beyond temporary pain, and trust that God is working something much greater, something eternal. In the face of persecution and difficulties, divine wisdom calls us to remain steadfast, not yielding to discouragement, upheld by the certainty that Christ has already won the victory for us. 7. The wisdom of Jesus that transforms impossible situations. How often does everything seem to follow a predictable path, only for the unexpected to happen? What is beyond our control often leaves us unsettled, yet Jesus constantly broke patterns and changed scenarios that seemed definitive. When the woman accused of adultery was brought before Him to be stoned, everything indicated that her fate was sealed. The law condemned her. But Jesus, with a single statement, "Let the one who has no sin cast the first stone," exposed the hypocrisy of her accusers and offered forgiveness to the woman. This action reveals wisdom that goes far beyond appearances. Jesus didn't see only the wrongdoing, He saw the heart. He shows us that no situation is truly lost when placed in God's hands. How many times do we look at broken relationships, closed doors, or irreversible mistakes and conclude that there is no solution? For God, what seems like the end may just be the beginning of a new story. While the world operates by the logic of punishment, Jesus acts by grace. Where humans expect vengeance, God releases mercy. And this mercy is not weakness, it is the power that restores, breaks cycles of pain, and transforms lives. Jesus calls us to live in a way that completely challenges the standards of this world. While society teaches us to respond to pain with revenge, to contempt with indifference, and to offense with pride, Christ invites us to a higher path, the path of love. He teaches us to respond with compassion when hurt, with forgiveness when wronged, and with hope when all seems lost. This posture is not natural to humans. It is spiritual, born from trust in God. Loving when it's easy does not require faith, but loving when it hurts is a choice that reveals spiritual maturity. It is in this moment that the heart becomes Christ-like. Jesus did not only preach love, He lived it to the cross. Even when rejected, betrayed, and crucified, He prayed for those who harmed Him. This shows that kingdom love does not depend on circumstances, but on total trust in divine wisdom. When we trust in God, we begin to see beyond what the eyes can perceive. The world looks at problems as definitive barriers. God sees them as opportunities to manifest His glory. What seems like defeat can become a testimony. What seems like delay can be preparation. What seems like loss can be deliverance. The Bible is full of examples of impossible situations completely reversed by God's power. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers. To human eyes, his story was ruined. He lost family, freedom, and dignity. He was imprisoned unjustly and forgotten for years. Everything pointed to a tragic ending, but God was working behind the scenes. What seemed like abandonment was positioning. What seemed like delay was training. In due time, Joseph was elevated to govern Egypt and became an instrument of salvation for many lives, including those who had harmed him. God turned betrayal into purpose. David was just a shepherd boy when he faced the giant Goliath. Logic said he had no chance, a young boy without armor against a seasoned warrior. But David did not trust in his strength. He trusted in the God of armies. With a simple stone and unwavering faith, the impossible happened. The giant fell, and the Lord's name was glorified. God turned weakness into victory. And the greatest example of all is the cross. To the disciples, Jesus' death seemed like the end of everything. Dreams were over. Hope was buried with his body in the tomb. The Messiah, whom they believed to be the Savior, was now dead. But what they saw as defeat was in reality the greatest plan of redemption in history. On the third day, Jesus rose. The empty tomb proclaimed that love conquered sin, life conquered death, and God always has the final word. What seemed like the end became the beginning of a reconciled humanity with the Father. This teaches us a powerful truth. Never evaluate God's actions only by the present moment. What seems confusing today may reveal a perfect purpose tomorrow. When Jesus calls us to respond with love, compassion, and hope, He is not ignoring pain. He is leading us to a deeper dimension of faith. Responding with love does not only change others, it mainly transforms us. Forgiveness liberates. Compassion heals. Hope renews. Often, we want God to change circumstances quickly, but He prefers first to transform our hearts. Because when the heart changes, circumstances lose the power to destroy us. Trusting in divine wisdom is resting even when we don't understand. It is continuing to obey even when we don't see immediate results. It is believing that God is working even in silence. And He is. God works in the soul's midnight hours, in seasons of waiting, in periods of pain, and in moments when everything seems still. Every tear is seen. Every prayer is heard. No struggle is wasted. Perhaps today you are facing a scenario that seems irreversible, a broken relationship, a frustrated dream, a problem that seems unsolvable, but the same hand that parted the Red Sea, lifted Joseph from prison, felled Goliath, and resurrected Jesus continues to act. Nothing is impossible for God. When we choose to love instead of hate, forgive instead of harbor bitterness, and trust instead of despair, we give space for heaven to intervene. Faith creates paths where logic sees only walls. And often it is precisely in the place of greatest pain that God builds the greatest miracle. Therefore, do not give up. Do not harden your heart. Do not let wounds take away your hope. Keep loving, keep believing, keep trusting. These words may seem simple, but they carry deep transformative power. Often in life we are tempted to give up in the face of difficulties, to lose faith when plans do not unfold as expected, or to close ourselves off to God's love and care. But it is precisely in these moments of apparent despair that divine grace manifests most intensely. Persisting in love, faith, and trust is an act of faith, demonstrating that we recognize God's sovereignty and the infallibility of His promises. God is an expert in turning defeats into victories, tears into testimonies, and endings into new beginnings. When we look at human life, we see interrupted paths, collapsing dreams, and extinguished hopes. But for God, nothing is impossible. What seems like a painful ending can be the beginning of something extraordinary. He works in the lives of those who do not let themselves be defeated, who keep faith even in the hardest trials. The Bible is full of examples of men and women who, trusting in God, transformed their stories. Joseph, sold by his brothers, humiliated and unjustly imprisoned, became governor of Egypt and saved entire nations from famine, Genesis 50:20. This shows us that suffering, when placed in God's hands, can produce unexpected and extraordinary fruit. When everything seems impossible, that is precisely when God begins to act supernaturally. Often we feel we have reached our limit, that there is no way out, that all efforts were in vain. It is at this point of apparent helplessness that divine intervention becomes evident. God does not need human conditions to act. He does not depend on our strength or strategies. His presence is enough to change any situation, no matter how desperate it seems. And the most remarkable thing is that he does not just transform external circumstances, but also works within us, strengthening our character, renewing our hope, and preparing us for the fulfillment of his perfect plans. Loving even when it seems difficult is an act of courage. To love means to reach out to others, forgive those who have hurt us, and believe the best, even when everything around suggests otherwise. Jesus taught us this by loving unconditionally, even when betrayed, slandered, and unjustly crucified. He is the ultimate example of persevering love. When we continue to love, even in the midst of pain, we are following in the Master's footsteps. Our love becomes a living testimony of God's grace, showing the world that true faith is unshaken by circumstances, remaining steadfast and unmovable. Believing is seeing beyond the visible. Believing is having certainty that, even if we cannot comprehend God's ways, He is working for our good. Faith allows us to wait patiently, trust without seeing, and keep our hearts open to blessings yet to come. Hebrews 11:1 reminds us, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." To believe is to trust that God is present in every detail, even when all seems lost. It is to believe that He is faithful to fulfill His promises, transforming tears into joy, hardship into learning, and challenges into opportunities for growth. Trusting is fully surrendering our lives to divine providence. Trusting means saying, "Lord, I do not know how this will resolve, but I know you are in control." It is letting go of anxiety, worry, and fear, placing our hope in God's hands. Trust is not passivity. It is a powerful action that allows us to rest in God's love and wisdom. It is recognizing that He sees the whole picture, knows every detail of our story, and knows the best moment to act. Trust is the bridge between present difficulty and future victory, the channel through which God's grace flows in our lives. Every tear shed has a purpose. Every defeat carries within it the seed of a powerful testimony. God transforms our experiences, even the most painful, into tools to build others up and glorify His name. When we view our wounds with faith, we can see that they are not signs of failure, but opportunities for growth, maturity, and transformation. They teach us humility, draw us closer to God, and allow us to better understand the depth of His love and mercy. Never underestimate the power of perseverance. Continuing to love, believe, and trust, even when all seems lost, is what allows us to witness miracles. It is what leads us to experience divine intervention in a real and tangible way. It is on this path of faith that we are shaped, strengthened, and prepared to fulfill the purpose God has for each of us. And when we finally look back, we realize that every tear, every challenge, and every moment of waiting was not in vain. Everything becomes testimony, victory, and reason for gratitude. Therefore, do not give up. Continue loving, even when it seems that no one recognizes or values your effort. Continue believing, even when the situation seems impossible. Continue trusting, even when the path seems dark and uncertain. God is working in ways we often cannot see, but which will certainly bring forth fruits of joy, peace, and transformation. He is an expert in turning the impossible into possible, pain into victory, and despair into renewed hope. Remember, moments of difficulty are not the end of the story. They are chapters preparing the ground for God's supernatural work. Keep moving forward with faith, love, and trust. Allow Him to guide your steps, transform your circumstances, and reveal His power in your life. Every tear, struggle, and obstacle can become a living testimony of God's love and faithfulness. Remain steadfast, because great things are coming. God never fails, and His goodness is infinite, and those who trust in Him never walk in vain. 8. Wisdom revealed through example. The impact of an attitude is often greater than any speech. Jesus taught not only with words, but through the way He lived. One of the most remarkable moments was when He, in a gesture of profound humility, washed the disciples' feet. That simple act carried a powerful message. In God's kingdom, greatness is found in serving. The disciples expected a master who would exercise authority like the leaders of the time, but Jesus showed that true leadership is born from humility. Through that gesture, he was practically saying, "Do you want to understand what wisdom is? Watch how I live." This still challenges us today. Are we willing to give up pride to serve? To do good even when no one sees? The world seeks recognition. Jesus teaches us to serve in silence. True wisdom appears in small gestures, helping without applause, loving without return, caring without visibility. It was with humble hands that Jesus taught the greatest lesson in leadership, and when we choose to act like him, our actions speak louder than our words, touching lives profoundly. 9. The wisdom of living today, without being controlled by tomorrow. How often is your mind in the future, worried about what hasn't even happened yet? We live in a society that pushes us toward anxiety, constant planning, and fear of what's ahead. But Jesus taught us something revolutionary. Do not live restless about tomorrow because each day has its own challenges. Divine wisdom invites us to live fully in the present, trusting that God is already taking care of the future. Planning is important, but living trapped in anxiety robs the peace and precious moments that God gives us today. Jesus, even knowing the cross he would face, did not live hurriedly. He devoted time to prayer, people, love, and care. He showed us that living in the present with purpose is an act of faith. When he multiplied the loaves and fish, he did not worry about tomorrow. He trusted that God would provide for that need in that moment. Likewise, when we trust in divine provision, we learn to rest even amidst uncertainties. How many blessings have we missed because we were too worried about the future? Today is a gift from God. It is in it that we grow, love, serve, and build tomorrow. Living wisely is learning to value each day, trusting that the future is already secure in the Lord's hands. Have you been living in the present with gratitude, or have you allowed anxiety about the future to steal your peace? Jesus invites us to experience a full life, trusting that God is already taking care of tomorrow. When we live this way, we find rest for the soul, inner freedom, and a new way of seeing each day. 10. The wisdom of forgiveness that brings healing and freedom. How many times has someone hurt you deeply, and you felt that forgiveness was impossible? At first, holding a grudge seems like a way to protect yourself, but over time, it becomes an emotional prison that corrodes from within. Jesus taught us that forgiveness should have no limits, not just sometimes, but continually, and not because the other person deserves it, but because forgiveness frees the one who chooses to forgive. True wisdom is understanding that forgiveness is not weakness, but a key that opens the doors to inner peace. Many people confuse forgiveness with passivity or consent to evil, but true forgiveness does not ignore injustice. It transforms it into learning and liberation. When we refuse to forgive, we remain bound to the pain of the past, carrying an invisible weight that wears us down, corrodes us, and prevents us from moving forward. It is as if every grievance were a stone on the path, making life's journey harder, heavier, and more painful. However, when we choose to forgive, we break that bond that keeps us tied to what hurt us. Forgiveness allows us to release the emotional baggage that hinders our growth, making us lighter and drawing us closer to the freedom God desires for us. It is not only an act of mercy toward another, but a gift we give ourselves, restoring the balance of the heart and allowing true peace to flourish. The Bible is full of examples that teach us this truth. Jesus, even on the cross, when he suffered unjustly, wounded and betrayed by those he loved, said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." These words reveal that forgiveness is not limited by human logic, but is a divine act of power. He shows us that forgiving does not mean accepting wrongdoing or ignoring pain, but trusting that God is just and can transform any situation into something that glorifies his name. Forgiveness also teaches us about liberation. Think of Joseph, sold into slavery by his own brothers. He suffered terrible injustices, lost family, freedom, and dignity. But when the time came, Joseph forgave. He not only freed others from the weight of their guilt, but freed himself from the bitterness that could have poisoned his soul. God used his story to save thousands of lives, and this was only possible because he chose to forgive. Joseph's forgiveness was not an act of weakness, but of great courage and wisdom. Often the difficulty in forgiving comes from the expectation of immediate justice or the desire to see the other suffer. We want those who hurt us to feel the same pain we felt, but that only keeps us chained to resentment. True justice does not depend on our control. God sees the heart, knows the truth, and rewards or corrects according to his infinite wisdom. While we wait for revenge or carry the pain, time passes and resentment only grows. Forgiveness, therefore, is an act of faith. It is trusting that God can transform pain into learning, injustice into an opportunity for growth, and suffering into testimony. It is letting go of the need to control others and placing the outcome in the hands of the Creator, who is sovereign over all things. When we forgive, we experience something the world cannot understand, a peace that transcends any circumstance, an inner freedom that does not depend on human justice or external recognition. Moreover, forgiveness is essential for our own spiritual and emotional well-being. Research and experience show that prolonged bitterness generates anxiety, depression, and even physical illness. Resentment silently corrodes us, even when we try to hide it. On the other hand, those who practice forgiveness live lighter, with calmer hearts and healthier relationships. Forgiveness not only reconciles the spirit, but also strengthens the mind and body, showing that divine wisdom is reflected in all areas of life. Another important point is that forgiveness is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process. Often we need to forgive repeatedly, revisiting old wounds until inner peace becomes solid. The constant practice of forgiveness shapes us, draws us closer to Christ, and teaches us to love more deeply and truly. It is a spiritual discipline that requires humility, patience, and faith, but its fruits are incomparable. Jesus also shows us that forgiveness is connected to love. He calls us to love not only those who love us, but also those who harm us. Loving and forgiving go hand in hand. One cannot exist without the other. When we choose to forgive, we are practicing God's love practically, allowing Him to work in us and through us, even in difficult situations. Therefore, understanding the value of forgiveness is recognizing that it is a bridge between pain and peace, between the past and a restored future. It is realizing that by releasing those who have offended us, we also free ourselves. Every act of forgiveness brings us closer to the heart of God and allows us to live a fuller, lighter, and blessed life. It is a conscious decision not to let bitterness define us or prevent us from moving forward. In summary, forgiving is an act of courage, wisdom, and faith. It is choosing to release the weight of resentment and walk in freedom. It is understanding that God is in control, that He sees every injustice, and that He can transform any situation into a blessing. When we choose to forgive, we open space for inner peace to flourish, for life to be restored, and for true love to guide our days. Therefore, may we learn to forgive without limits, without expecting return, without justifying the pain, but trusting in God's restoring power. May every wound become an opportunity to grow in grace and compassion. May every hurt be released through forgiveness. And at the end of each day, may we lay down with a light heart, knowing that we chose the path of wisdom, peace, and love, just as Christ taught us. Forgiveness is not just an act, it is a transformed life. It is the path to true spiritual freedom, and it is through it that we discover that even when everything seems lost, God is working to restore, heal, and renew every part of our soul. Forgiveness does not erase the wrong, but heals the heart. Jesus demonstrated this on the cross by interceding for those who hurt Him. If He could forgive at the moment of greatest suffering, He shows us that it is also possible to release forgiveness with God's help. Perhaps you carry an old wound that still hurts. Divine wisdom teaches us that holding on to resentment is like taking poison and expecting the other to suffer. It is we who suffer. Forgiving is choosing freedom. It is allowing God to heal what pain tried to destroy. 11. The wisdom of building a life on solid foundations. Have you ever felt like you were supporting your life on something unstable? In a world that values security in temporary things like money, status, and success, it is easy to build on fragile foundations. Jesus told the story of two men, one built on the rock, the other on sand. When the storms came, only the house founded on the rock stood. The lesson is clear. True wisdom is building life on what cannot be shaken, on Christ and His Word. Building on the rock requires time, dedication, and faith. Sand may seem faster and easier, but it cannot withstand crises. Difficulties will come to everyone. What makes the difference is not avoiding them, but being prepared to face them with firmness. When our faith is based on God, we are not destroyed by losses, disappointments, or life's changes. We may be shaken, but not defeated. The rock is the truth of God, constant and secure in any circumstance. 12. The wisdom that transforms through love. Have you ever reflected on the power of true love? Not the superficial love of the world, but the love Jesus taught, the one that heals, restores, and transforms. Jesus summarized all the law in loving God above all else and loving your neighbor as yourself. This shows that love is the foundation of a life full of purpose. Loving with wisdom is not just feeling, it is deciding to love every day, even when it is difficult. It is easy to love those who treat us well. The challenge is to love when we are hurt, rejected, or misunderstood, but it is precisely this love that changes hearts. Jesus reached out to the outcasts, forgave sinners, and welcomed the rejected, and this love transformed everything around him. When we love as he loved, we become instruments of healing in a wounded world. God's love breaks barriers, rebuilds lives, and brings reconciliation. 13. The wisdom to choose courageously, even in the midst of fear. Have you ever faced decisions that seemed impossible? Paths where any choice seemed to bring pain or uncertainty? Jesus showed that the most difficult decisions require faith, not just logic. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus gave us one of the greatest lessons in courage, faith, and obedience that humanity could receive. He knew exactly what was coming: suffering, pain, and death on the cross. Yet he chose to surrender to the Father's will, saying, "Father, not as I will, but as you will." In that moment, human fear could have paralyzed even the bravest heart. But Jesus showed us that true strength is not the absence of fear, but full trust in God's divine plan. Gethsemane was not just a moment of prayer, it was a demonstration of the power of faith over human logic. Jesus knew the pain would come. He knew he would be tempted by suffering and doubt, yet he did not allow fear to dictate his actions. He clung to divine wisdom, recognizing that God sees what we cannot. This is one of the greatest secrets of spiritual life, to trust in what is beyond our sight, to accept that there are greater plans even when everything seems impossible or incomprehensible. How often do we allow fear to control us in the face of challenges? Fear paralyzes. It prevents us from acting, from believing, from moving forward. It makes us question purpose, doubt God's love, and retreat from trials. But faith is different. Faith propels. It does not deny pain, nor ignore suffering, but it gives us courage to continue when human logic screams, "It's impossible." Faith connects us to something greater, reminds us we are not alone, and assures us that God is working even when we cannot understand the path. In Gethsemane, Jesus teaches us that obeying God does not mean the absence of inner struggle. On the contrary, he felt the weight of sorrow, asked for strength, prayed, and yet remained steadfast. True obedience is not blind. It comes from trust, intimacy with God, and understanding that his plans are perfect. Obeying God often means choosing the more difficult path, one that requires courage to face the unknown, but leads to victory and transformation. This lesson applies to all of us. How often are we called to act according to God's will, even without fully understanding why? How often do we feel fear when faced with decisions that could change our lives or situations that seem insurmountable? It is in these moments that faith must prevail. Just as Jesus trusted the Father completely, we can learn to trust that every challenge, every pain, and every trial has a greater purpose, even if it is invisible to our eyes. Divine wisdom also teaches us that God sees beyond the present. He knows the beginning, middle, and end of every situation. He sees what we cannot, anticipates outcomes, and knows exactly when each step should be taken. When we trust in this knowledge, fear loses its power and courage is strengthened. We do not need to carry the weight of the future on our shoulders. We can rest, knowing that God governs everything with justice, love, and perfection. Fear is natural, but faith transforms. Fear makes us focus only on danger. Faith allows us to see opportunity. Fear paralyzes, faith propels. And the momentum of faith is not a leap into the void. It is a movement guided by trust in the Creator, who knows every detail, intention, and outcome. When we learn to let faith guide us, we discover that we can face situations that once seemed insurmountable. We can walk through moments of darkness with the certainty that divine light is guiding us. In Gethsemane, Jesus also shows us that prayer is a powerful tool to strengthen faith. He withdrew to pray, expressed his anguish, yet surrendered to the Father's will. Prayer does not remove the challenge, but it gives us strength to face it. It connects us to the source of all wisdom, courage, and power. It reminds us that we are not alone, and that even amid fear and pain, we can find peace and direction. This same lesson applies to our lives today. When we face difficult decisions, painful situations, or deep fears, we can be inspired by Jesus' example. We can choose to trust, pray, and surrender to God's will, even without fully understanding the path. Every step taken in faith brings us closer to God and transforms us internally, shaping our character, strengthening our courage, and expanding our capacity to love and persevere. The story of Gethsemane reminds us that faith is not passivity. It is action, guided by trust. It is courage in the face of the unknown, hope in the midst of the impossible, and surrender in the midst of pain. It is the certainty that even when we do not see the outcome, God is working. It is understanding that every challenge, trial, and fear can be transformed into learning, growth, and victory when we remain steadfast in faith. Therefore, let us learn from Jesus in Gethsemane to obey God even in the face of fear, to trust His wisdom even without understanding all the details, and to allow faith to drive us, not fear. Let us withdraw in prayer, lay down our anxieties, and choose to walk the path of faith, knowing that God sees beyond what our eyes can reach and sustains us every step of the journey. In the end, Gethsemane is not just a historical account. It is a call for each of us. A reminder that even in moments of extreme difficulty, we can trust God fully. We can choose faith instead of fear, obedience instead of doubt, and hope instead of despair. And when we do this, we discover that the strength we need to overcome is not in ourselves, but in the one who rules heaven and earth, God who never abandons us, who guides us, and who transforms every trial into victory. Making decisions with wisdom is like crossing a bridge covered in fog. You cannot see the end, but you must take the first step, trusting that God sustains the path. Some choices hurt at first, but they produce growth, maturity, and purpose. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of courage, love, and balance. With wisdom from above, we can decide with confidence, knowing we never walk alone. Often, the fear of making a decision comes from anxiety about the future. We think, what if I fail? What if this is not the right choice? This fear can paralyze us. However, when we place our trust in God, we begin to understand that even what we consider mistakes can be transformed by Him into something good. The Lord governs every detail of our lives, including the moments when we feel insecure or incapable. This truth brings rest to the heart, for we know that regardless of the outcome, God is working to accomplish His purposes, as Romans 8:28 reminds us. Given this, how can you face today those decisions that seem so difficult? Divine wisdom calls us to abandon fear and trust fully in the Lord. It is not about having all the answers in advance, but walking with courage, knowing that when we choose in faith, God is faithful to guide and sustain us at every stage of the journey. Now let us reflect on the wisdom that helps us discern truth amid confusion. Have you ever felt lost amid so much contradictory information, unsure of what to believe? In today's world, truth often seems distorted, relative, and confusing. Separating fact from deception can be extremely exhausting. But Jesus left us a powerful declaration that illuminates our path. I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 14:6. Wisdom from God allows us to recognize truth not based on popular opinion or circumstances, but grounded in what Christ taught us. This wisdom acts as a light shining in the darkness, revealing the path when everything around seems uncertain. God's truth does not change with trends, nor does it adapt to human desires. It remains firm, and it is this firmness that helps us identify it, even when the world tries to distort it. Following Jesus' wisdom prevents us from being swept away by the current of deception that circulates everywhere. It is like being in the midst of a storm with strong winds. Without roots, we would be easily toppled. But when we are rooted in God's word, we become like a solid tree, standing firm even in the fiercest storms. When we know Scripture, we can recognize what is true because God's truth becomes our foundation. Jesus himself warned about people who would come to deceive, comparing them to wolves in sheep's clothing, Matthew 7:15. And deception is not limited to the spiritual realm. It manifests in many areas of life. Therefore, divine wisdom not only reveals the truth, but also enables us to perceive lies before they harm us. Spiritual discernment protects us, guides us, and allows us to see beyond appearances. It works like a compass that points the right direction even through the fog. And this ability does not come from ourselves. It is the work of the Holy Spirit who leads us into all truth, as Jesus promised in John 16:13. God's wisdom invites us to seek guidance through prayer, examine each situation carefully, and ask the Lord before making decisions. When we rely only on our own logic or the opinions of the majority, we become vulnerable to error. But when we seek divine guidance, we are protected from traps and illusions. Perhaps today you are surrounded by conflicting voices, unsure whom to trust. God's wisdom calls you back to the unshakable foundation of truth, Jesus Christ. In him, we find security, clarity, and peace, even amid chaos. Now, let us reflect on the wisdom that produces eternal fruit. Have you ever thought about the impact of your choices over time? In a world that values quick results and immediate rewards, we often forget what truly has lasting value. Jesus, however, teaches us to invest in what endures forever. He declared, "I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." John 15:5. Divine wisdom directs us toward what has eternal value. Just as a fruit tree requires time, care, and growth to bear fruit, our spiritual life also demands constancy, patience, and depth in God. The fruit that endures does not come from impulsive actions, but from a life firmly connected to Christ. When we remain in him, our choices begin to reflect his will, and the results go far beyond the present. This fruit is not measured by financial success or human recognition, but by inner transformation and the spiritual impact we have on those around us. Jesus referred to character development, the love we demonstrate, the patience we exercise, the kindness we practice. The fruits of the Spirit described in Galatians 5:22-23. They reveal how connected we are to God and living according to his wisdom. The wisdom that produces eternal fruit teaches us to look beyond ourselves. It leads us to invest in people, relationships, acts of compassion, and deeds that reflect God's love. Every word of encouragement, every act of generosity, and every decision made with justice is like a seed planted that, in due time, will bear abundant fruit. And the most wonderful part is that this fruit does not disappear. It endures, touching lives and spreading Christ's love from generation to generation. While many things in this world are temporary, possessions, fame, and achievements, the impact of divine wisdom is eternal. Living connected to the true vine, which is Jesus, makes our actions carry eternal purpose. Therefore, begin today to produce fruit that endures. Perhaps this means choosing to love when it would be easier to criticize, to forgive when pride demands revenge, or to serve when no one is watching. God's wisdom calls us to live with our eyes set on eternity, aware that everything we do in Christ has lasting value. What kind of fruit do you want to leave as a legacy? Thank you very much for following along. I hope these teachings of Jesus on divine wisdom have touched your heart and inspired you to live more aligned with God's purposes. If this content has blessed you, continue exploring other videos on the channel. There are many topics that can strengthen your faith and help you apply Christ's principles in your daily life. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new content that builds your spiritual life. May God greatly bless your journey.